talking about here on my channel right now. It's all about Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively's.
The rush hour grind always comes with its own brand of chaos. But today it feels like the universe threw every type of headline into a blender and hit the highest speed. That's why, before I even sip my coffee, I know exactly what kind of morning it's going to be. The kind where everything from political feuds to celebrity meltdowns to courtroom showdowns gets shoved right into the middle of your commute. And trust me, we have all of it today. The political fights are getting nastier. The culture war commentators are torching everything in sight. And Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni's legal disaster is taking another dramatic turn. So buckle in, because the stories for your morning ride start right now, and the momentum isn't slowing for anybody. Let's warm up with something light before the emotional roller coaster drops. A birthday that made me feel like my entire spine cracked into dust. You ever hear someone's age and suddenly feel the weight of time slam into you like a bus? That's exactly what hit me when I heard that Michaela Maroney, yes, the Olympic gymnast, yes, the not impressed queen, yes, the teenager who practically lived on our Twitter feeds, just hit 30. 30. As in the age actual adults are. Wasn't she 15 like yesterday? Didn't we all just watch her flipping around on that vault while we sat on the couch eating snacks and pretending to understand gymnastics scoring? Suddenly I'm questioning how the calendar works and whether we all accidentally skipped a decade. But hey, don't look at my face too closely. New York wind ages a person quicker than scandal headlines age a politician. I walked out this morning and the cold slapped me into another dimension. I swear my cheeks tightened so much I looked like a villain in a fantasy movie. Not Voldemort exactly, but his first cousin. It's brutal out here. Speaking of brutal, Hollywood's messiest feud just got messier. Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni. Yes, that Blake, that Justin, and that lawsuit that's been fueling a million online debates just hit a major delay. The court date has officially been pushed back, and suddenly everyone who thought this thing was about to reach its dramatic conclusion has to buckle in for even more months of tension, filings, pettiness, and passive-aggressive legal jabs. The whole thing feels like watching two exes who refuse to admit who messed up first. That's honestly the best comparison. Picture the most bitter breakup you've ever heard of. Now multiply it by Hollywood egos and millions of dollars and you're getting close. The trial was originally set for March 9, 2026, and a whole bunch of people had already blocked off their schedule for it. But then reality hit. Criminal trials get priority in the already overloaded court system. So the Lively versus Baldoni showdown got bumped down the line until May 18th. That's right. Late spring drama instead of early spring drama. Which is fine, if you're not the one who publicly declared you'd be attending the trial in person. If you are, well, now you're rebooking your life because a judge somewhere had other plans. But here's where things get interesting. The judge overseeing the case is apparently so fed up with the mounting pressure and the emotional bloodbath forming between the two sides that he recommended, quite directly, that Blake Lively's team and Justin Baldoni's team attempt to settle. Not settle down. Settle the case. As in, please, I beg you, figure this out before you drag the entire legal system into this circus again. And honestly, can you blame him? The filings alone probably require their own dedicated office storage. To recap the stakes, Baldoni originally filed a countersuit claiming $400 million in damages, saying the allegations and timing around Blake's accusations sabotaged his career, smeared his name, and derailed the release of their film. Meanwhile, Blake is suing for even more, $500 million, saying her reputation, business opportunities, family peace, and mental well-being took major hits because of Baldoni's actions during the movie production and everything that followed. So in short, two people claiming their careers were wounded, two sides convinced they are the wrong party, and enough money at stake to buy entire neighborhoods. Now, with those numbers floating around, you'd think both sides would at least try to play fair with the small details, like acknowledging basic facts. But apparently we're not doing that today. Because while neither side had public comments on the delay itself, the court filings told a different story. One that exposes how petty this thing has become. And trust me, the pettiness is reaching Olympic-level skill. The Baldoni camp submitted a section explaining his credentials, as legal filings often do. That he starred in the critically praised, Golden Globe-nominated series Jane the Virgin, directed films for major studios, and wrote 2 books on masculinity and relationship dynamics. It was all very standard, very by the book. And one might expect Blake's team to simply acknowledge the obvious and move on. Nope. Instead, Blake's response had one of the most petty, eyebrow-raising objections so far. They disputed the characterization of Jane the Virgin as acclaimed or Golden Globe nominated, insisting that the evidence didn't support that description. Let that sink in. Not disputing that he acted in the show. Not disputing that it existed. Not disputing his role. But disputing whether the show was acclaimed. That is a knife twist delivered with a smile. That is the type of dig you make when you and your ex are dividing furniture, and you say, "You can keep the bed. It wasn't that comfortable anyway." And honestly, it's hilarious because all it takes is one search to know that Jane the Virgin was absolutely an acclaimed show.
I don't think I relate
Critics
to any of my
loved it.
characters.
Reviewers
I've played a
praised
crack
it.
addict from
Gina
Boston.
Rodriguez
I
literally
played an
won a
Upper
Golden
East
Globe
Side
for her role
princess.
in it. And even if the award technically went to the actor and not the entire show, come on. If someone in your cast wins a Golden Globe, the show gets bragging rights. That's just how it works. But here's the thing. The objection wasn't really about critical reception. It was about ego, prestige, status. This whole legal battle is soaked in ego. It's all about who was more successful, who had more to lose, who had more industry power, who should have been treated like the bigger star. And when money this large is involved, even the smallest jab becomes a weapon, which leads into the deeper tension behind all these filings. There is an unspoken prestige war happening between Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and Justin Baldoni. Blake and Ryan are Hollywood royalty in terms of fame, household name value, and blockbuster visibility. Baldoni, on the other hand, built his career more quietly, television success, directing heartfelt films, writing books on masculinity, and building a reputation as a thoughtful, socially engaged creative. They're in different lanes. But somehow this lawsuit has smashed the lanes together, turning artistic differences into a full-blown pride competition. And let's be honest, when Blake's team rejected the characterization of Jane the Virgin as acclaimed, what they really meant was, he's small time, we're big time. At least that's how it reads. It's the legal equivalent of someone saying, you were never really all that. But then comes the counterpoint. If we're going to talk about success and acclaim, we also need to talk about box office bombs. And Blake Lively has had a couple. The rhythm section lost nearly its entire budget. Green Lantern, which she starred in alongside Ryan, cost a fortune and did not deliver on expectations. Meanwhile, Baldoni's movies, while not billion-dollar franchises, were still well-received emotionally and praised for their sincerity. So this entire back and forth isn't really about what's true. It's about pride, status, who gets to walk away with the last word. And honestly, watching 2 grown adults, backed by multimillion-dollar legal teams, fight over whether a CW show counts as acclaimed feels like watching kids argue over who's cooler because their toy is shinier. But this case isn't staying petty, no, it's taking bigger strides. Because Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, emerged from a post-discovery conference and hinted that more rulings were coming and that things were about to get even more complicated. He spoke like a man carrying 12 secrets and 5 headaches at once. Calm, but with the kind of composure you only have when you're balancing explosives. And then he added something that made people stop scrolling. That Justin was doing his best to hold up under the pressure, that it had been a brutal year, and that the hope now rested on vindication, whatever form that takes. That kind of language signals a storm still coming. A bigger one. Maybe one that could blow open the entire Hollywood dynamic. And if the trial truly goes forward in May, all of the hidden details, the texts, the behind-the-scenes conflicts, the miscommunications and alleged power plays, they'll all finally see daylight. But here's the twist. The longer this drags on, the more exhausted everyone becomes, which means the chance of settlement might actually increase. Exhaustion cracks even the strongest pride. And that's where things get complicated. Because what kind of settlement satisfies both sides? Blake cannot publicly admit wrongdoing without harming her reputation. Justin cannot walk away without clearing his name. The only possible middle ground would require both to accept some kind of shared blame or mutual misunderstanding, which feels impossible considering how far this conflict has stretched. And yet fatigue does strange things. Hollywood ego or not, lawyers burn out. Reputations fray. Fans lose interest. Media coverage twists narratives beyond recognition. The constant pressure of being in a public legal war drains a person's identity until the only thing left is the desire for everything to stop. And that's where we leave the lively, Baldoni battlefield and full of tension, swollen with pride, tangled in details, weighed down by endless filings, and with a trial date inching farther away while emotions escalate. But this isn't. Emerged from a post-discovery conference and hinted that more rulings were coming and that things were about to get even more complicated. He spoke like a man carrying 12 secrets and 5 headaches at once. Calm, but with the kind of composure you only have when you're balancing explosives. And then he added something that made people stop scrolling. That Justin was doing his best to hold up under the pressure, that it had been a brutal year, and that the hope now rested on vindication, whatever form that takes. That kind of language signals a storm still coming. A bigger one. Maybe one that could blow open the entire Hollywood dynamic. And if the trial truly goes forward in May, all of the hidden details, the texts, the behind-the-scenes conflicts, the miscommunications and alleged power plays, they'll all finally see daylight. But here's the twist. The longer this drags on, the more exhausted everyone becomes, which means the chance of settlement might actually increase. Exhaustion cracks even the strongest pride. And that's where things get complicated. Because what kind of settlement satisfies both sides? Blake cannot publicly admit wrongdoing without harming her reputation. Justin cannot walk away without clearing his name. The only possible middle ground would require both to accept some kind of shared blame or mutual misunderstanding, which feels impossible considering how far this conflict has stretched. And yet fatigue does strange things. Hollywood ego or not, lawyers burn out. Reputations fray. Fans lose interest. Media coverage twists narratives beyond recognition. The constant pressure of being in a public legal war drains a person's identity until the only thing left is the desire for everything to stop. And that's where we leave the lively, Baldoni battlefield and full of tension, swollen with pride, tangled in details, weighed down by endless filings, and with a trial date inching farther away while emotions escalate. But this isn't the only chaos we're dealing with today. The world outside the courtroom is burning too. Politicians are melting down, commentators are imploding, and conspiracy flames are spreading like wildfire. What makes this entire situation even more fascinating is how, as the legal tension between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni intensifies, the world around them is spiraling into its own version of chaos, creating this strange backdrop where celebrity scandal, cultural meltdowns, and political flame wars all merge into one giant whirlwind. It's like every week now, every corner of pop culture gets swallowed by some kind of dispute. Whether it's influencers arguing over pointless drama, politicians screaming about imaginary threats, or fan bases tearing each other apart over celebrities they've never met. And in the middle of all that noise, here comes this lawsuit. Not just as a legal conflict, but as a symbol of how fame, ego, pressure, and financial stakes collide in Hollywood. Blake and Justin's case isn't just two people fighting. It has become a mirror reflecting everything wrong with the modern entertainment machine. The delay of the trial almost feels symbolic at this point, like the universe saying, "This story isn't done yet. There are more layers to peel, more emotions to unravel, more motives to expose." And trust me, the deeper we go, the more it becomes clear that the surface-level legal drama is only half the story. Underneath it is this boiling tension between celebrity power structures, personal insecurities, industry politics, and the kind of quiet jealousy that lives behind fake Hollywood smiles. Because let's be honest, if you look closely at the way both sides have behaved, you can feel this undertone, that Blake's side is terrified of admitting Justin had any real impact, any real prestige, or any real value in the project they worked on. That's why they nitpick things like whether Jane the Virgin counts as acclaimed, or whether Justin is Hollywood enough. It reads like insecurity disguised as legal argument. Meanwhile, Baldoni's filings come across like someone who spent years quietly building a career he believed in, only to watch it get, from his perspective, publicly torched by a co-star whose fame massively outsizes his. Both sides are angry, defensive, wounded, and looking for someone to blame. Blake feels wronged and betrayed. Justin feels sabotaged and humiliated. And when emotions like those enter a courtroom, everything gets heavier, sharper, messier. Every phrase becomes a weapon. Every adjective becomes a battlefield. Even something as harmless as describing a show as acclaimed turns into a point of contention. Not because anyone genuinely cares, but because it symbolizes validation Blake doesn't want to give and validation Justin desperately needs to reclaim. But the public only sees the filings. They don't see the internal panic. The conversations in private rooms. The meetings where lawyers go, "We need to be careful with that wording." Or, "If you admit that, it opens the door to another attack." They don't see the fear of headlines, the fear of cancellation, the fear of backlash. And both sides absolutely have those fears. Blake, for all her Hollywood power and brand strength, has never faced a controversy this large or this persistent. Her image has always been clean, controlled, polished. The glamorous actress with the witty husband, 4 kids, perfect styling, and a career built on likability. So being dragged into a lawsuit that paints her as manipulative, vindictive, or dishonest is emotionally catastrophic for someone whose brand thrives on relatability and respect. And on the other side, Justin has spent years crafting a reputation as a thoughtful, empathetic, socially conscious storyteller, someone who stands for emotional intelligence and positive male leadership. So having allegations hanging over his name, allegations questioning his professionalism, ethics, or personal respect, feels like a direct attack on the foundation of everything he believes he stands for. And that's what makes the stakes so intense. Neither is just protecting their career. They're protecting their identity, their narrative, their sense of who they are in the industry and in the world. This isn't about money, even though hundreds of millions of dollars are on the line. It's about who gets to walk away with dignity, who gets to tell their version of the story, who gets to remain the good guy in the public eye. Hollywood is built on perception, and perception is more fragile than glass. One crack expands fast. That's why the judge recommending settlement isn't just a legal suggestion. It's a warning disguised as advice. Because once this goes to trial, once witnesses start talking under oath, once private texts become public evidence, once the studios get dragged in, once journalists start picking apart every detail, the narrative might not belong to either of them anymore. The court doesn't care about reputations. Cares about facts. And facts, when laid bare, often paint a more complicated picture than the one any celebrity PR team wants floating around. For Blake, a trial could reveal moments where her frustration, ambition, or emotional reactions got the best of her. For Justin, a trial could expose communication missteps, leadership mistakes, or behind-the-scenes conflicts he didn't handle well. That's why the delay matters. It gives both sides more time to fear the unknown. But what adds even more fuel to this fire is how the public has gotten involved. Fan bases have split into teams, just like they always do in celebrity scandals. Blake's supporters argue that she's being targeted because she's a successful woman in Hollywood who dared to speak up. Justin's supporters argue that men who try to be emotionally open always get punished the moment they step out of line. Some people think Ryan Reynolds has been quietly stirring things behind the scenes to defend Blake. Others think Justin's team is trying to use the court of public opinion to balance the power difference. The whole thing has turned into a cultural debate bigger than the actual lawsuit. And when a case becomes symbolic, everyone starts projecting onto it. Suddenly, it's not just Blake versus Justin. It's gender versus gender, fame versus talent, power versus vulnerability, ego versus integrity. People online love turning individual conflicts into social battlegrounds. It makes the drama feel meaningful, even though most of it is speculation dressed as analysis. But here's where things get especially messy. The more polarized the public becomes, the more pressure both Blake and Justin feel. When fans start speaking for you, they create narratives you didn't approve, opinions you didn't endorse, expectations you never asked for. They start shaping your image without your consent. And celebrities hate that. They want control. They want to define their own story. So the fact that this case is spiraling into a public spectacle only increases the emotional stakes behind the scenes. Both sides feel like they're defending more than a lawsuit, they're defending the story of who they are. And that's why the small jabs, like the Jane the Virgin wasn't acclaimed argument, hit harder than they should. It's not about the words. It's about what the words imply. Blake's camp is essentially saying, "You're not on our level." Justin's camp responds with filings that imply, "Your accusations destroyed more than you understand." Every page of this lawsuit is soaked in resentment, disappointment, and bruised pride. If this case had stayed private, maybe they could have settled quietly. Maybe they could have found closure. But because it became public, because it involved studios, media outlets, fan bases, industry politics, and narratives much larger than the conflict itself, it turned into something bigger. Something neither can walk away from without feeling like they lost. That's the trap of public scandal. Even winning feels like losing if the process ruins your peace. And then there's the jealousy factor, the one thing no one wants to admit out loud but everyone can feel in the filings and the statements. There is a competitiveness between them, not necessarily in the traditional sense, but in the sense that both feel the other represents something they aren't. Blake represents the glamorous, mainstream Hollywood success Justin never fully achieved. Justin represents the thoughtful, artistic, purpose-driven image Blake never fully embodied. They reflect each other's insecurities. And when people feel threatened, even unintentionally, their reactions get sharper. Their pride gets louder. Their sensitivity increases. That's why everything in this case feels personal even when it's framed as professional. The delay in the trial date only stretches that tension further. 2 more months of overthinking, analyzing, worrying, strategizing. 2 more months for the media to dig deeper. 2 more months for fan narratives to intensify. 2 more months for old wounds to reopen and new frustrations to form. Time doesn't always heal. Sometimes it irritates. Sometimes it amplifies. And imagine being in their homes right now. Blake having difficult conversations with Ryan, strategizing with her team, worrying about how this affects her career, her brand deals, her public perception. Justin talking with his wife, his lawyers, his friends in the industry, trying to keep his professional commitments afloat while navigating a lawsuit that weighs on him every single day. Imagine the exhaustion, the tension that follows them into their kitchen, their car, their sleep, their work. You don't file a lawsuit this big and go on with life like nothing happened. It becomes part of your identity until it's over. But here's the twist. When cases drag on this long, when emotions run this deep, something unexpected often happens. People break. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in a quiet moment where pride melts into fatigue, where anger collapses into sadness, where the desire to win becomes overshadowed by the desire for peace. And that moment could happen for either of them. It might be Blake realizing that no amount of money or vindication will restore the simplicity of her public image. It might be Justin realizing that even if he wins in court, the emotional cost might outweigh the victory. It might be both realizing that they want their lives back, their work, their peace, their mental clarity, more than they want to keep fighting. That's why the judge pushing for a settlement wasn't random. It was intuition. Judges see patterns. They know when a case is about facts and when it's about emotion. And this one is drenched in emotion. But the question is, will either side let go of their pride long enough to settle? Because settling requires admitting that the war isn't worth continuing. And right now, both sides feel wounded enough to keep fighting. And that brings us to where we stand now, at the edge of a delayed trial, with more filings on the way, more public discourse heating up, more speculation floating around, and more pressure crushing both parties from all angles. Blake has taken subtle jabs that signal deep insecurity and lingering resentment. Justin has delivered calm but heavy messages through his attorney that reveal a year of emotional strain and quiet endurance. And the world is watching, waiting, refreshing feeds, ready to dissect every new detail. But no matter how this ends, through settlement, through trial, or through some last-minute twist, one thing is clear. This case will reshape both of them. It will mark their careers. It will redefine parts of their public image. It will change how the industry views them. And maybe, in a strange way, it will force them to confront parts of themselves they avoided for years. Because scandals don't just expose the truth about events. They expose the truth about the people involved. The delay isn't the end. It's the deep breath before the plunge. And when May arrives, whether they're in a courtroom or sitting across a table negotiating one final compromise, the world will finally get the clarity it's been waiting for. Until then, the tension hangs in the air, and the only guarantee is that the next chapter will be louder, sharper, and far more revealing than anything we've seen so far.